In the world of databases, inner joins allows us to combine records from two tables whenever there are matching values in field common to both tables. So if we take this simple example, we have a customer table and an order table. Here, when a customer makes an order, not only do we record the order date and cost, but also we associate that order to a customer. This is a unique ID which the customer has, and then therefore it can be associated back to the customer data. So if you wanted a clear view of the customer and which orders have been created, an inner join allows you to combine data from multiple tables based upon, in this case, the common key associated in both tables. So if we were to use an inner join on this table to work out the customers and their orders, this would produce something like this, for example. So here you can see that the fields from the customer table and the order table are placed now into one table. So the order fields are here. And we can see, utilizing the common key customer ID, we can see the customer information and the order that they placed. This type of operation allows us to visualize our data in a much simpler way. The database, of course, is not the only place where we can store data. CSV, comma separated value file format, is a very common file format to store data. So it has the same principles as a database in many ways, in terms of that we can collate that data like we did here with this inner join in this table. So this tutorial, we're going to be talking about how to join multiple CSV files. So we're going to create two CSV files, customer and orders, and we're basically going to join that data together utilizing the inner join to produce something which looks a little bit like this. So we're going to join the customer data to the orders and produce a new CSV file with that data. This tutorial includes two examples. First of all, we'll take the pure Python route, utilizing the built-in CSV module. That's going to allow us to create, manage, edit CSV files. This is a great opportunity, an example to introduce specialized container data types. And then in addition to that, the command line arguments. So the ability to actually pass in arguments through the command line. In the second example, we just walked through the solution utilizing Pandas. So first up then, we're going to need a CSV file. So I'm going to create a new file here called customer.csv. And then I'm just going to copy and paste. I've already pre-created this. So this is the code that we're using right here. So it's a very simple CSV file for the customer. We can see that we've got customer ID, initial, street, and country. So if you are working with small CSV files, you can see that this color codes, or this extension, Rainbow CSV, if you go to extensions and download Rainbow CSV, this extension, you can see color codes each column, and that can make it easier working with smaller CSV files. So in addition to that then, let's go ahead and create another new file. Let's call this orders.csv. And let me just put some data into there. So the important thing here is to make sure in this simple case, the customer ID is in the same way in the first position as the orders customer ID. So just make sure that's the case. And you can see here that we got the common key, which is the customer ID, and these keys correspond to the customer. To help break down the code, I'm going to be utilizing a Jupyter Notebook. If you haven't come across Jupyter Notebooks before, it's well worth having a little search. It is kind of synonymous to machine learning, AI world, writing code for that space. So inside your extensions here, first of all, you're going to need the Jupyter Notebook support extension. And then you can go straight ahead now and just create a new Jupyter Notebook directly from Visual Studio Code. So let's go ahead and write a new file, CSV merge dot, and then the file extension here is going to be IP and then YMB. Okay, so what this provides is a kind of nice, if you haven't seen this before, I'm just going to summarize it. It provides us nice little boxes for us to create code, and we can run them directly from this section. So print hello, and we can literally just run it, select the environment we want to work with. So this is where Python is installed. I'm using 3.9.5, and then I can basically just run it, and you can see the output straight away. I can clear the output of the cell, and then I can delete it. I can maybe add some markdown above it. So Let's call this CSV merge, press the tick button. So I can use a markdown for that, and it makes it nice to kind of break down things. Okay, so let's give this a go. So first of all, then, there's two tools that we're going to be utilizing here. So let's go for the imports. So let's import collections, and we'll talk about that in a while. And then we're also going to import CSV. If you do look at the code in the video description, there will be notes here to support this code as well. I'm not going to do the notes or add the notes into this file. So the CSV module is a built-in module that allows us to implement and work with the CSV format, and then collections we'll talk about shortly. So I'll go ahead and run that, and now that's ready. And if you like that, when that's run, that's now behind the scenes in memory, so I can now utilize that in the next piece of code. So next up then, well, the first stage, I need to kind of gather these two CSV files. In order to merge them, I'm going to need to prepare them in a in a data format that can then actually then be manipulated and then saved back to a CSV file. So we can't directly work necessarily with the CSV file in this format. We have to convert it first. So let's go ahead and do that. So with, and here we're going to use open. So that's going to allow me access to the file. I'm going to open this file up so I can start utilizing it. So it's customer, let's call this customers. Customers, and then we've got some optional flags here. So R or W, whether we want to read or write. Just head over to the Python documentation. There's a few different flags here. The default is R, so we don't actually need it, but we're just going to put that in place. So this file should be read only, and then as in file. So I'm going to refer to this file, capture or open this file, and then refer to it as in file. Right, so with that then, let's go ahead now and utilize the CSV module. So there's a few tools here that we're going to be utilizing. The first one is going to be reader. So we want to read this data. So what's that going to do is going to create a reader object, which is going to return a list of strings for each row of your CSV file. So we can take a look at that. So let's say object that we're going to produce, CSV. So we're going to use the CSV module, and then we're going to use the reader command. And what do we want to read? Well, we want to read our file. So we've opened our file, and now we've read the file and converted that into this new object type. So we can go ahead and just print that. So in actual fact, let's go ahead and run a for loop. So for x in object, let's just print out x. And then that gives us a chance to see what data is actually being collected. So notice here when I run it, there's nothing there. And that's because I need CSV at the end, the actual file. So I run that again. You can see now, like I said, this object is returning a list of strings. So you can see a string for each row of our CSV file. Now, to perform this action that we're performing in this tutorial, there are many ways of doing it. This is just one example, but we want to prepare our data in this case, we're going to be utilizing a dictionary. So I can clear all the outputs. Let's create another block of code. So this time, I want to now prepare the second CSV file. So similar code again with open, and this time it's going to be the orders. And then again, it can be just read only. And then as, let's go for in file again. So this time, same thing again. Let's create our object equals CSV reader. So we're going to read this file, and then we go ahead and, well, in this case, like I didn't do there, what we're going to need, if we think about what we're trying to achieve here, one thing that we're going to need to kind of produce, this is our data, remember, that we're working with. We want to produce this. One thing that we are going to need for sure is the header in this case. So not all CSV files have headers, in this case referring to the name of the columns in the CSV file. So we're making the assumption that our CSV file will include this. Now what we want to do in the output you can see here we want to include all of the customer header column titles, and then in addition to that, all the orders minus the customer ID. We don't want to output customer ID again over this side. We only need it once. So we need all of these headers, and then all of these except the customer ID. So let's just stop here a second, and actually I didn't finish this off. I've raced ahead. So let's go ahead and just grab the header of this one, A equals, and then we're just going to get the next. We're going to use next to actually get the first row. Yes. So object. Okay, so next, basically, what we've seen here is we've created an object. It returns a list of strings, and the first item iterable list in that object is the header. So we use next to get the first in that list. So if I just print off header here, it will list all of the first, which is the first row, which is the header item. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll print that. And you can see we've got customer ID, initial, street, and country, and obviously that correlates to the customer headers here. Okay, let's get rid of that. Okay, so we've gathered those. So we can do the same thing here in our second file. So let's call this header B equals next object. There we go. So now we've got the headers of both. Now the thing is here, I think like I said previously, potentially we don't want all of the headers, and we'll deal with that later. So at this point, we've grabbed the data from our CSV file. Now we want to prepare it in our data type that we're going to work with. So here, like I said previously, we're going to use a dictionary. So let's go into the first section here, the customer CSV, and let's just prepare this. So let's create a new dictionary. We'll call this A, and then let's say row 0, row, and then we want to grab basically everything from the first onwards, and then we'll say for row in object. Okay, so let's just print this out and see what we have created here. Okay, so you can see here that for each row in this new object that we created using CSV Reader, we've iterated through that, and for each row we've got here the key, and then in addition to that we've gone ahead and created a list here, so kind of a nested list for each row within our CSV file. So just to quickly break this down a little bit further, so here we have an iterator. We're iterating over the object that we created with CSV Reader. That grabbed all the data from the customer CSV, and you saw that created an object, an iterator that allowed us to iterate it over each line of our customer CSV file. So as we grab one of the lines of our customer.csv file data, what we do is we create a new dictionary. We take the first element of that, so the first element being this ID here from the customer ID, and then we put it right here, and then we go ahead and we slice and we just grab all the other data. So we're saying 1 onwards. So we're saying 1 is here. So 1 onwards, we're just grabbing the rest of that data and then building that into our dictionary. And that's where we're producing this right here. So we're just constructing our dictionary using this loop and this format. So you can see here, it says 10 here. So if I change the number back to 1 in our customer and then run that again, you can see that it's grabbed the number 1. So this is correlating to the first piece of data here, number 1, 3, 2, 4, and 5. And that correlates to this 1, 3, 2, 4, and 5. So the ordering doesn't matter here at the moment. Right, so let's just clear all the outputs. Let's go back to our second then. So this is making the assumption that the data in the customer file has all unique customer IDs. Because the problem we have here, if it wasn't, let's just have 2 customer ID 1s. If this was the case and we run this, you can see it will cause a problem. We just need to clear that and run it all again. And the problem we have here is that you can see that we have one less file. We have 1, 2, 4, and 5. So 1, 2, 4, and 5. So notice what's happening is that this is overriding this piece of data here. So this is getting created in the first loop, and then we loop again, and that's getting overridden by this because of the custom ID is the same. So in our dictionary here, we can't have a key that is the same. So that isn't a problem with the customer data because we make the assumption that all customers would have unique IDs. But however, the orders, well, that's slightly different because the customer ID, the customer might create multiple orders. So in actual fact, like you see here, this customer 2 has 2 orders, and that's valid within this kind of data set here. So this is where the specialized container data types come in handy. And if you haven't seen this before, it's well worth just reading, becoming familiar with some of these tools. You may not have to use them all, but it's good to know that they exist. So when you are trying to solve problems, you know that these tools exist and potentially you can use them. So like it says here, this module implements specialized container data types. So in the situation where we have the need to create a dictionary from a set of data where we want to, where we have the issue of this unique key problem, we can utilize this default dict. So this is going to allow us to create a dictionary of nested list, if you like, and it's going to supply missing values. So essentially what it's going to do is going to create our keys for us. So let's go ahead now and start to build. So this is going to be dictionary B. That's going to equal, I'm going to say collections. We're going to use the default dict, and then we're going to pass in list. So what's going to happen here when we iterate over our data, for each time there is a new key, we're going to build a list. And then what we're going to do is when we find a similar key, it means that we're going to update that list with that new item. So what we're doing here then is essentially we're going to create a new dictionary with this data. So for every new key here, we're going to create an entry in our dictionary. What's going to happen here now is that this is number 2. It's a new item. So we're going to build this list and add number 2, and that's going to be entered into our dictionary. And what we're going to do now is that when we go to this row here, because this exists already, we're not going to build a new list. We're going to append the current list and add that in that list. So what we're going to end up with is 1, 2, 3 items inside of our dictionary. So let's go ahead and just iterate over this and perform the action. So for row in object. So we're going to iterate over the data that we've kind of captured here with CSV reader. And now we're going to say dictionary B, and then we're going to say row 0. That would get the ID, our key, sorry. And then we're going to say append, and that's the rest of the data. Row let's go 1. I'm going to slice that, so that produces the rest of the data. So this is iterating over this data, and like I said, I'll just reiterate myself. We'll grab the data from the orders.csv file, and we put it into this new object via CSV reader, and now we're going to iterate over it. So every time we iterate over this data, we're going to add it to this new data type, collections.default dict, and basically for every time we iterate over, we're going to create a new list. Okay, so when we create a new item, we're going to grab the first item. Let's go back to our data, wherever that data is. Yeah, like I said, we're going to grab this first piece of data. This is the key. Fantastic. And then we're going to slice the rest of this data. And then we're going to do the same thing again. This is the key. And like I said, this time, this is a new key. Again, 2, this doesn't exist already. So as we iterate over this, it's going to create a new list. And then, like I said, this time, because this already exists, because we're utilizing this customized data type, it's not going to cause an error. What's going to happen is that we aren't going to create a new entry, but we're going to use append to add it to the existing entry. So let's see what this actually returns. With orders, No search file orders. Okay, so did I name that incorrectly? Orders. Okay, so I've got an error. There's an R somewhere apparently. CSV R. Okay, so I need a comma there. Okay, so let's go ahead and print this out. So we're going to print out B. And there we go. So we can see the data here. We have the first iterable, number 1, and we can see the data here, 1, and then the data, and then we have 3. So just check that. So now this line here, 3, and then the data. So 4, blah, blah, blah. And then the next one is 2, 2. So you can see we have the first item here from orders. And then you can see that this is now nested within this. So within this list here, it's now nested. We have this nested, 2 nested lists here. And we have the second item here, which has been appended inside of this nested list, which correlates to this. So essentially, we've collated this data. And there might be more of these customer ID 2s. So by doing that, we've now created a data structure where we've collated all the corresponding orders to the customer ID. So now we have that in place, we can go ahead and build a new file. So we don't have to add it all to a new file, but that's what we're going to do here. So let's say new file.csv. So we're going to build a new file. This doesn't exist at the moment. This is going to be, we're going to need to write to this, so W, and then we're going to say as new file. So we're going to refer to it as new file. So let's go ahead now and say W. So we're going to refer this to us as W equals CSV.writer, new file. And then let's go ahead and say W equals, well, actually W, let's first of all write in this new file, let's go ahead and write a new row. So let's, we've got to take the header A. So we're going to grab everything from header A. Remember, we restored all the header items in header A. And we use next to grab the first item in the iterator, which is the first row of our customer data. And we did the same thing again with the orders. But remember, with the orders, what we don't want is the customer ID again, because we already have the customer ID here inside the customer CSV. So we don't need to include that too. So what we're going to do here then is say header A plus header B. And then we're just going to go ahead and slice, because we know, and we're making the assumption that the key is in the first position, we'll just go ahead and slice that. So we start from position 2 onwards. So that's going to grab all that. So we can just print that out. Let's have a look. So that creates a new file here. And you can see that we've now grabbed all the corresponding headings. So now for the merge, if you like, it's really just 2 lines of code. There's a lot of setup there just for 2 lines of code, but essentially what we need to do now is we need to match the data. So this has all now been nicely prepared in dictionaries. So we need to make sure, we need to look at the customer ID of each table, and where they correlate, we need to essentially add this data to the customer and make that into a single row. So let's give that a go. So this is going to be a for loop. So for items in B, so I'm just going to, it's a bit of a strange way of creating variables here, but I've called this all B's. This is all B. This is the order stuff. So for IA, so we're going to be working with the customers first. We're going to loop through that data. So that's how we're inferring it. So in, say, dictionary A, dot keys. Okay, so what am I doing here? So I'm basically just looping over the keys in this dictionary, right? So this is the customer. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's going to be 5 keys. So I'm going to loop through 5 times. And that's what I'm planning to do there. So each time I loop through, I'm going to grab the key and put it into this IA. So now I'm going to create another for loop. So for IB, so now I need to loop for IB. So essentially, I'm going to grab the first key from customer 1, and then I'm going to check it against IB, see if it exists in IB. So in dict b dot get, and then I'm going to say IA. So that's obviously referring to the key in the first in customers. And then here, I'm just going to do something special. I'll explain this in a second, but I'm going to use these double square brackets here, and I'll explain that in a second exactly what's going on there. So now I'm going to say w dot write row again. So we're going to need to write a new row. So let's write a new row. So that's IA. So that's basically the key. Where's IA coming from? So IA here, remember? So we're looping through the keys. So that's going to be, the first one's going to be 1. So 1 is going to be passed into here. So I'm going to print out in my new row in my CSV file number 1. And then I'm going to say, I'll concatenate that with the dict A. So the data from dictionary A, IA, and then plus IA referring to, again, number 1. So basically I'm just printing out all the items in the row corresponding to in the row corresponding to 1. So I'm basically just saying print all this out as well. And then I need to plus that to the data in the orders. So IB. So what's that about? So here you can see that we've grabbed here dictionary B, that's the ordered dictionary, and then basically using get to get the data. So I'm basically going to get it by key. Now the key that I'm using is corresponding to the customer key. So I'm using the customer key to get the data from the orders and then return that row. So then I can go ahead and print that off as well. So with that in place, hopefully, now we'll give this a go and see what it looks like. And there we go. So if I just zoom out, so I've got customer ID, initials, street, country, order ID, order date, and then total cost. Now notice here then, we've got these 2 pieces of data here, which obviously don't correlate. So these customers have not purchased anything. So let's just go back to our code here. Now notice I put this here. So let's just remove that and see what happens. We get an error. So we get this non-type object is not iterable, because the problem we've got here is that this data here doesn't actually correlate to anything. So there aren't actually any, these keys, these customer IDs don't actually exist here in this file here. So we receive an error. So we need to deal with that somehow. So that's just all reminding ourselves. So here we're working with dictionaries and we're using get. So remember, the get method returns the value for the specified key if the key is in the dictionary. Now, the key is not in the dictionary here, and that's the problem. So the get function provides us 2 parameter values. That's the key name. That's what we're looking at here. And in addition to that, it provides an optional value to return if the key does not exist. And that's what we're doing here. So we could just have this, and this will return nothing. So if we did this, you can see from the file, if I open up again, you can see that won't return where there aren't a match. However, we can drill a little bit deeper and use the doubles, and then that will then return the data, like we saw previously in the new file. You can see that will return the data from the customer CSV file, which doesn't correlate to the orders. So just take it step by step. If you are new to Python and you're having trouble understanding or following this code, then just take it step by step and then just run some prints if you're not too sure. So print, and then that'll be IA to see what happens there, and just take it step by step and try and map it across. Use a bit of paper if you like and try and do that. Utilizing utilizing variable names and naming is really important. I've tried to make it obvious here. For information, say A referring to customer, being this is all about A, and then B. So hopefully that gives you some sort of guidance of where this data is coming from and how it's being then prepared to then be outputted into our new CSV file. So I did mention I'll talk a little bit about command line arguments. So let's do that. Let's just create a new file. Let's call this CSV merge.py. And let's just grab all our code here. We're just going to put it into the one file. So that's the first item. Second. So what we're going to do here then, we're just going to build a simple function. Let's call this function merge or CSV merge. And we're going to pass in two parameters here. So let's go for file1 and file2. So we are going to need to just indent that because we're working inside of a function. We're going to need the colon there. So yeah, we're just going ahead and create a function. So it's now inside of a function. So let's go ahead and create our if name equals main. So that's going to fire off. If you're not too sure what that is, there is a nice tutorial. If you have a look in the search on the channel, I'll take you through what exactly name main is, what it's used for. So now we're going to create an if statement. So if sys dot argv 1 equals merge, then we're going to do something. I'm just going to print merge requested. Okay, so what is this sys argv? So this allows us to pass in arguments through the command line. So let's have a look at this. Well, first of all, we need to import sys to access to those tools. Let's bring up the command line here. So whenever I run this file, so if I run Python, what's it called? CSV merge.py, I can pass in some values. So I passed in that, and that's then being captured and printed. So notice that it didn't actually happen there. So let's just have a look at this code. And that's because we need to make sure that this correlates to merge here. So we're doing an if statement. I forgot about that. So let's just type in merge. And you can see now it prints out merge requested. So you can see that's a simple way of us to add customized commands or customized options and send that into the code. And it gives us then an opportunity to capture that. So notice here then we've selected 1. So 0 is going to be the name of the file. So if I do that, it's going to actually print out CSV merge.py. So if I just get rid of that, so let's just show you that. Print sys arg v0. That's going to print off CSV merge. So just capturing this element here. So you can see potentially that if you add more, then you just need to increase the number here, and that would capture the next element that you've typed in. So now we can go ahead and just fire this off if a merge is requested. But in addition to that, what we want to do is we're going to fire off the function CSV merge, and we're going to grab sys arg v. This is going to be 2, which is going to be the name of the first file. And then secondly, we're going to then just grab sys.arg v3. So we're going to pass in 3 arguments here. So first of all, what we want to do, we want to merge, and then the name of the two files. We're going to capture that. That's then going to be passed into our function here, and then we can just go ahead and pass them in. Okay, so let's give this a go. Let's get rid of the new file, and then let's just run this command. Apologies if you can't see that. Let's bring that up. So I type in Python3, the name of the file, and then I want to run merge. The first file is going to be customer, and then the second file is going to be customers, and then third one's going to be orders. And there we go. So we output, we've got the file completed, and there we have it. So that was the sysargv, which is essentially a list of command line arguments passed into the Python program from the command line. We saw there that we accessed them utilizing the index number. Remember, index 0 is going to be the name of the module that we wanted to run. In this case, it was CSV merge.py, and then 1 is the next command, and then the index number, and so on. Okay, so let's finish off with a Pandas example. So this is really super simple. So let's take a look. So if you're not familiar with Pandas, essentially it is a data structure designed to work with relational labeled data, typically used in the machine learning world. It is a really powerful tool, lots of built-ins that makes it easy for us to play and work with data. So we are going to need to import it in. So I'm working locally here, so by all means work in a virtual environment, but you're going to need to pip install Pandas for this. I think mine's already installed. So once that's done, we're just going to add it onto the end here. So let's go ahead and import Pandas, typically as abbreviate that as PD, and then let's say customers data frame equals PD, so pandas.read. So we're going to use read underscore CSV. Yep. And then we're just going to grab the customers .csv file. Happy days. So that's nicely now prepared. So what's happening now is instead of us kind of preparing that into our structure that we used before, dictionaries, Pandas, we're using a data frame, which essentially is a two-dimensional labeled data structure. It has columns and so on. So it just makes it easier for us to work with that data. You can think of it like a spreadsheet or an SQL table. So let's just take a look of that. If we just print that out, customer, we can take a look. Oh, print customer, customers. There we go. So let's do the same thing with orders. So orders underscore df equals pd dot read CSV orders. Okay, so now we prepared the data. So now what? So this is really simple because Pandas comes with merge, and that just makes it really easy to utilize. So let's say customer sales data frame equals PD merge. So with merge, we can perform a range of different merges, left, right joins, inner joins. In this example, we're using the default inner join. So by all means, have a look at the documentation if you're interested in that. So we're going to say sale customers. We're going to specify the first data frame and then the second. And then we can then specify what we want to do. So how equals, we want to do inner, but like the default is inner anyway. So we didn't necessarily need that. And then we can specify the key. So we can say on equals. Now, if we don't specify this, it's just going to take the first element in orders and customers, which is the customer ID. So it'd work anyway, but we can specify the key that we want to work on. That's the customer ID. So with that in place, we just expand that. With that in place, let's go ahead and actually write a new let's write a new CSV file. So we use to CSV. Let's call this sales.csv, and then I think we're good to go. Give that a go, and then have a look. There we go. So notice in this case, we do have this additional row here. Let's go back to the code here. Let's use a comma and say index equals false. And we just run that again, update the sales, and you can see that that then removes the index that's been placed automatically. That just cleans up our code a little bit more. And there we have it, almost like a baseline, if you like, working with CSV files, thinking about joining multiple files, utilizing inner join. Now, it gets obviously more complicated than this. Once you start thinking about left and right joins, and then what type of data we're working with, we did see there were some requirements here in order to work with this code. One of them being that we needed to make sure that this field, that the key ID was the first. If we were to move this across somewhere else, that would cause issues with this current code. Obviously, we can deal with these little things very easily, but depending on your situation, depending on your needs and requirements, this will expand and change. Of course it will. So I do hope that was useful. If it was, let me know. If you want to see something else, if I've missed something, if you want to add to the code, if you've got some better ideas or different examples you would like to add to the repository, please let me know or make a request on GitHub. Thank you for watching if you have got to the end, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.